So welcome everyone to Ed Redesign's Institute for Success Planning Virtual Learning Series. This is session one of a three-part series. And we will be talking about supporting success through authentic and effective family and community partnerships today. Want to welcome all of our community of practice members, all of our people in our broader learning community, and all of the other partners that we have with national partners, funders, anyone else on the call that supports this work for us to be able to do the work of the Institute and work with local communities to be able to implement the success planning strategy. So at Ed Redesign, we have a vision around opportunity for all children and youth, and that means creating accessible pathways and viable pathways in both school and life. And through that vision, we are working together to be able to really think about systemic change across sectors and through a cradle to career approach. So our team, who you see on the screen, works diligently every day to be able to implement various strategies. In 2014, if you see our founder and director, Paul Revel, really conceptualized a broader conception around education and youth development, understanding that schools couldn't do it alone after a long career in school reform. And in that, we are really trying to mobilize the field to be able to think about education in a broader context. Part of that work that we're doing, we launched also in 2022, the Institute for Success Planning. I am Tawhida Jackson, the director of the Institute for Success Planning, for those of you who may not have met me in this context. And in the Institute, what we're doing is really looking at more individualized relationship-based approaches to be able to make sure that we are meeting every kid where they are and giving them what they need to be able to be successful and to have viable pathways to succeed. So we are we are housed at the Harvard Graduate School for Education, and we are a field catalyst, really focused on talent and leadership development, actionable research, and movement building. The talent and leadership development, we have an opportunity to be able to have communities of practice where we are working with local leaders engaged in not only success planning, but other collaborative action work through our children's cabinets or our By All Means community. We also have actionable research where our research department works on creating resources and toolkits and evidence-based approaches to be able to share with the field on some of the lessons learned and to be able to advance the work of the field around personalized supports. And then lastly, we have movement building where we work diligently to be able to create a broader movement so that we are thinking about this is just the way that we think of education more broadly, and that success planning or any of these strategies aren't a special feature, but just the way that we think about a more whole child approach to the way that we are serving young people. We know that there is a correlation between socioeconomic status and educational attainment, and what we're trying to do is to ensure that race, place, and income no longer are determinants of school and life outcomes for young people. So the work that we're doing is really a systemic approach to think about how do we bring people from across sectors together to really get at some of the stubborn problems that we have seen in education and the broader life outcomes for children and their families. We know that young people exist in an ecosystem, so that broader ecosystem is what we're focused on, and we're looking at greater social and economic mobility. In order for us to get there, we have to make sure that all of the players in the ecosystem are coordinating and aligning their efforts, and the success planning work has been a broader strategy to be able to bring all of the pieces of the ecosystem together and to be able to really dream big and have a shared vision around success for young people. We do this in two ways to fulfill our mission. So we advance two different strategies: place-based cross-sector collaboration, which you heard me talk about children's cabinets. Sometimes it could be called a children's cabinet. Sometimes it can be called also a P20 council in some communities, or a broader place-based strategy, a cross-sector collaborative table. There's some kind of decision-making mechanism in every community where decisions are made around resources and strategy and policy and advocacy. And then the work that we do at the Institute is around personalized relationship-based support. So those are the success planning work really focuses on how are we meeting the individual needs of young people, so that they are able to reach their full potential. So why success planning? Just to give you a little bit of background before we get to our featured speaker, Dr. Mapp. Success planning is an approach where we have a 360-degree view of a child's strengths, interests, and goals, and the challenges that they might be experiencing at any given moment, and then fostering meaningful relationships with students through connecting them with a caring adult which we call navigators. And then we're ensuring that those relationships and supports are not just the luck of the draw. So making sure that the zip code or that correlation that we talked about earlier is no longer a reality for young people, and that all young people have an opportunity to thrive. And then we're also connecting personalization and collaborative action. So as we think about success planning as a strategy, this broader strategy is really having an opportunity to be able to look at a plan of action and have that data inform that cross-sector collaborative infrastructure that we talked about, whether it's a children's cabinet, and then that resource development, strategic direction, policy, and advocacy all can be informed by the data that we're receiving through success planning. The need for broader personalization allows us to meet children where they are and give them what they need and really diagnose their needs and strengths and supply some customized opportunities and supports. And then these are the principles that our success planning work underpins all of the work that we do in the success planning community of practice. And then the 4 different components. So young people are connected to a navigator, they have a plan of action, they receive a system of supports to meet their needs, and then the data platform informs that broader table. And then just last but not least, just really thinking about the role of each of the players in the success planning strategy. So young people have the opportunity to dream big and to have their passions and their goals communicated to the adults around them. We have the navigator who actually ensures that every child is known, seen, understood, and heard, and then that they are customizing the opportunities and supports for them. And then the reason why we're here today and joined by the fabulous Dr. Karen Mapp is we're really thinking about and doubling down on the family and caregiver role today. So families and caregivers are partners in the success planning process, and we've been really thinking about how they understand and know their children deeply, and how that wisdom and support and expertise can be translated to accelerate progress in the success planning. These are the communities that we are currently partnering with, implementing success planning. On the communities in the blue are our success planning communities. And then we've been really focusing on engaging families as partners. So having an increased focus on effective strategies to engage families through our success planning implementation. Navigators have become trusted messengers and connectors. So we've seen navigators have the opportunity to do home visits, to be the connector between families and teachers. We've had situations where young people felt like the navigator could help them connect with their families better as well. And then we have many local cross-sector teams within our community of practice implementing a 2-gen approach to success planning. So they are not only looking at how are they creating viable pathways to success for their young people, but also how are families able to be in the capacity building of families, and how are they a part of the process for us to be able to build their capacity and then work alongside them and partner with them so that we can ensure their success as well. And I just want to spotlight a few communities before I turn it over to Dr. Mapp. So we have several communities where I said that there's a 2-gen approach where they have been working with families. New York City, their success planning initiative is called Every Child and Family Known. And in that iteration of success planning, they are working with unhoused populations to be able to not only look at kind of a compliance-driven implementation. So they're working with the Department of Education and their social services departments to really think about a more relationship-based approach to success planning, so that is they're able to connect with families, connect with young people, and provide the supports that they need to be successful. And then also in Dayton, Ohio, they are working with families not only to be able to connect them and their young people to supports, but also are hiring families as navigators, actually. So when you talk about capacity building, it's not doing with, but it's walking alongside them and also providing opportunities for families to be able to be a part of that. In Minneapolis, they have their family success coaches who are now doing some of the success planning practices and connecting with navigators to be able to help families be connected to success planning there. And then in San Francisco, similarly, where their success coaches, their family success coaches are also being integrated into the success planning community of practice. We are very proud and have learned a lot of things over the last year from all of these communities, and just want to shout out, if any of them are on the call, all of the amazing work that they've been doing. And then just in practice and think about policy and implications for the way we engage families and partner with families. So I am going to turn it over to Dr. Karen Mapp, and you all will have the pleasure to hear from her, and then we will have a Q&A after that.
Okay, thanks everybody. Good day. I don't know what time it is where everyone is on this screen. I'm sure it's all over different time zones, but wanted to say good day to you and thank you so much, Tawhida, for inviting me to come. So I am going to share my screen and we're going to go over sort of the goals for today. Hopefully everybody can see this. Could you give me a thumbs up if you can? Okay, perfect. All right, so what I'm going to be sharing with you today is basically what I've learned after doing this work for about 30 years about what effective practice actually looks like when we're trying to build partnerships with families. And so I'm going to share a few things with you. I want to talk about what do we actually mean by family engagement, because a lot of times what I hear as engagement actually isn't, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I want to discuss why family engagement is actually important, because for a lot of you, you need to know what is the return on the investment. I often hear that, oh, if we ask our educators to do this, it's going to be one more thing on their plates, and how do we justify it? So I'm going to talk a little bit about why it's important and actually how we need to really integrate it into our practice. It's not an add-on. It's not something extra. Actually, if we want to call ourselves proficient as educators, it's actually one of the skills that we should have embedded in our practice. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the conditions and shifts that you can also make in your own practice in order to make partnerships thrive and be sustained. So hold your questions until the end. I'm going to try to race through this. I've revealed to the team that my computer, I'm hoping that it doesn't die out. I cannot find my charger. So we're going to hope that the universe gives my computer enough energy to get through the hour. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to define what family engagement actually is. And this is actually a definition that I really like. It was co-created, and that's why I like it, with families and educators and policymakers in Connecticut. And it's my working definition that I actually use for family engagement. And if you take a minute just read it, you'll see that the words that they came up with, and these were words that the families actually insisted be a part of the definition, is that engagement be a full, equal, and equitable partnership. Full meaning that there weren't really all of these rigid limits on how families can be engaged. Traditionally, a lot of our families, particularly our families from disenfranchised, marginalized communities, have been kept at the outskirts. So if you think about a field where all the playing is happening on the field and everyone's up in the spectator seats watching, that's kind of the dynamic that has been created in the past around our families. Again, particularly our families who have been disenfranchised for generations. And so they really wanted to see this partnership be full, where They, with collaboration and with some consensus, can be engaged in lots of different levels of the educational process. Equal meaning that we see each other as equal partners, that we try to flatten the hierarchies, and equitable meaning for our families who may not be able to, for example, come to the school or who have different work hours, that we're open and willing to make some different changes so that all of our families can participate. And then, of course, why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this to promote children's learning and development from birth through college and career. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can better link our engagement practices to children's learning and development. But when I travel and I talk to people and they say to me, "Oh, Dr. Mapp, we are doing family engagement." A lot of times what I'm actually seeing is what we call family involvement. And there's a difference between true, full, authentic engagement and involvement. And so I'm going to sort of go over these differences now. So involvement is more of a sort of, it focuses on individual responsibility. It's not really trying to create partnership and a collective approach. And a lot of times what we see in these instances is the communication to families and community members is really one way. There isn't a table set for real two-way collaborative communication. There isn't a table set for trust to be formed between families and communities. And that's a big piece of partnership, is forming relationships of trust and respect. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Space for listening is a low priority. There aren't really many opportunities where educators and others gather information or listen to families and communities, and they're the ones who best know what's happening on the ground. But a lot of times we come in and we do things to them and not with them. And the focus is on programming and not on people. So let's put together all these programs. And then, of course, if we haven't focused on building relationships, nobody comes. And when nobody comes, guess what happens? Is the parents get blamed. They don't care, is what I sometimes hear. And it's not that they don't care, it's that the table hasn't been set, the relationships haven't been built between the different entities. And the relationship is often transactional. So, I give you a paper to sign and sign it and give it back to me. Or I give you instructions on how to maybe support your child's learning, and I'll check in with you to see if you've done it. I'll check in on the parent portal to see if you logged in. But it's very transactional. Whereas engagement, we're really focusing on collective responsibility. We're trying to build partnerships as a part of our practice. Communication with families is two-way. Listening is prioritized. We're actually valuing the knowledge that our families have, both about their communities and about their children. Our families often are their children's first teachers. And by the way, when I say families here, I mean all adult caretakers, because we know that in many instances our children are being raised by grandma, grandpa, auntie, uncle, et cetera, et cetera. And this really focuses on collaborative practice, us coming together, working together. And the relationship is actually transformative, where we are learning about each other. I'll talk a little bit more about transformative relationships where, we're not the only ones that are just giving information, that we're actually learning from each other. So Larry Filazzo, who is an author and a public school teacher, he's a high school teacher. He often talks about, he pretty much puts everything that I just said into this wonderful paragraph, where he talks about how a school or an organization striving for family involvement, they lead with their mouth. So they're doing all the talking, they're doing all the decision making, they're identifying the projects, telling families how they can contribute. But a school or an organization striving for engagement leads with its ears. So it's listening to families. And the goal of these kinds of partnerships is not to see our families as clients, but as true partners, true collaborators, true co-decision makers. So that's really what we're striving for. And I'm going to emphasize the fact that you first have to build trusting relationships, because what we're seeing around the country, and I'm sure some of you have already started thinking about this, is these situations where we have these parent groups, they come in, they're talking about all sorts of things that may not be in alignment with what we think is good for children. But what I've seen in the instances where I've run in to look at these types of dynamics is that there was no trust built between home and schools. And so these organizations, sometimes outside organizations, come into communities and say, oh, schools don't listen to you. Come with us, join us, because we're going to empower you and we're going to show you how to, do all of these different things. Sometimes, unfortunately, things like book bans have come out of this. But in the communities where I've seen where there was already trust built among the families, those groups aren't able to take hold, because I say, we already have really good relationships with our schools. And so no, we don't want that kind of adversarial relationship with our schools. So this is what I've been seeing around the country. So what have we learned about the impact of family school partnerships? Some of you may remember, and I'm dating myself here, you may remember the commercial where it was a Wendy's commercial, and it was Clara Peller was the name of the young woman in the commercial, and she yelled out, "Where's the beef?" And what she was really asking for was, what's the return on investment of my investment, right? I'm purchasing this hamburger. I don't expect to see a little hockey puck. I want to see a full-size hamburger. Where's the beef? Well, for a lot of you and for your partners, that's the question that they ask. And so Ann Henderson and I and some of my former students actually collaborated on writing this book called Everyone Wins. And it actually is a book that describes what are the wins for our students, for our educators, for our families, for our communities. And what we did was we looked at the most recent research around the impact of family school partnerships on these different outcomes, and we put together this book. And so here's the first one, the wins for our students. And these are the things that we've seen over the past 50 years, actually, when we look at the impact of family school partnerships on our kiddos. And so you'll see there, a lot of the things that we want for our students, a lot of the things that we see in our standards. These things come more easily when we have partnerships between home and school. So the higher grades and test scores, et cetera, also a greater sense of efficacy and self-esteem. But what was different about this book, because there are 4 or 5 in the evidence series of books. What was different about this book is that there's actually research now that shows what are the outcomes of these partnerships on more than just the students. So for example, we now know that family school partnerships are really good for our educators. What happens is that when we get into these partnerships, we start to learn about each other. One of the studies that we showed by this woman named Catherine McKnight showed that actually when we start working together in partnership, our deficit-based mindsets about each other's disappear. And we shift from maybe deficit-based thinking about our families and communities to asset-based thinking about our families, communities. And the same thing happens between our families. Our families stop maybe being intimidated by us as educators. They start seeing us as true partners. So when we really work together, this was a study actually about the impact of home visits, of relational home visits. We start to see that it's sort of the antidote to deficit-based thinking, these kinds of partnerships. We see that our educators increase their multicultural awareness. They themselves have greater success in motivating and engaging students because now they're in partnership with families. And for those of you who are educators on this Zoom, you know that if you've spent time in the classroom, when the children know that you know grandma, grandpa, auntie, uncle, their families, their behavior is a little different. And so we found that our teachers are telling us that their classroom management improves because now they're in partnership with families. And the other thing, the last bullet, is that we found that educators like being in cultures that are family friendly. They like working at organizations and schools that have strong partnerships with their families. Why? Because they feel like they have partners. They're not going it alone in the classroom. They're not going it alone when it comes to leading the organization. They have all of these connections in the community and with families. And so this is a big ROI if you are a leader, a school leader, a district leader, to know that you will not have the kind of turnaround because there's these strong partnerships with your families is very, very, very important. We also see outcomes, wonderful outcomes for our families. They feel like because of the partnership with us as educators, they know more about what's happening when it comes to what's expected for teaching and learning, what are some of the goals. And so they're learning and they're getting information from us about how they can support their children. So it's really helping their relationships with their child. Of course, their rapport with school staff is much better. And they themselves, we talk about this concept of social capital. You'll see there at the end that our families, and again, particularly our families who may feel disenfranchised, they start to really feel that school is home and that school is the place where they can make strong and better connections. And I know that that's what one of the goals is of the educational redesign work that you're doing. Wins for our schools: positive school climate, better morale, improved facilities. They're more responsive to community concerns because now they have an ear, they're listening. And for those of you who have choice, we have found across the country that the word gets out. This is a school that values families. This is a school I'd like my children to attend. Some of you may know this work. This is the wonderful work by the Chicago Consortium on School Research. This research came out in 2010. And what they found was they were looking for sort of the reasons why some schools are able to improve while others don't. And so what they found, they were actually surprised at what they found. They found that there are actually 5 ingredients that are absolutely essential to the improvement of schools. So that rectangle you see in the right-hand top corner is actually the school and the classroom. And the triangle represents a concept that was developed by Richard Elmore at the Ed School called the instructional core. So that is the relationship between the teacher, the facilitator, the student, the learner, and content. All 5 of these circles, and you'll notice they're all the same size, have a strong effect on what happens in that classroom in terms of it being successful. And you'll see there's strong leadership is number 1, professional capacity, meaning everybody in the building wants to be engaged in a learning community. But look at what's number 3. Parent and community ties, along with a student-centered learning climate and strong instructional guidance. What they found is that your ties with families and communities are just as important as the other 4 circles here. So that if you remove number 3, your school does not improve. It's sort of like they use a cake metaphor. And basically it's like, you have your cake recipe, you have your main ingredients. It could be very tempting to say that the flour is more important than the eggs, et cetera, but we all know that you have to blend those things together to have a successful cake. So they say, in this sense, school development is much like baking a cake. Without sugar, it will be tasteless. Without eggs or baking powder, the cake will be flat and chewy. If one ingredient is absent, it's just not a cake. And my question to you that I want you to think about right now is that in your environments, in your settings, is family and community engagement considered a main and essential ingredient to the improvement of your schools? Is it prioritized as such? Is it in the budget? Is family and community engagement high on the priority list? Because if it's not, you have a problem. because we now know from the research is that without it, you're not going to see deep and sustained improvement. You have to have family engagement. It's not an add-on, folks. We've known that for a while, but the research now is overwhelming to say that you've got to have this as a part of your portfolio of strategies. These are also the wins for your districts and your communities. So it broadens the impact of engagement, goes right out into your communities. So what I want to do is I want to take a minute and I try not to talk at you for the whole time. What I'd like to do is I want you to take a look at this video. This is a video that was taken during COVID. We actually did a series with Scholastic during COVID because people woke up and realized that family engagement was a key important part of our success during COVID. No, Pedro Noguero talks about no education happened during the pandemic unless it went through our families. And so what I did was I did a series on family engagement during the pandemic, and we talked to educators about who were really good at family engagement before the pandemic. Actually, we talked about them about strategies that they were using. And so this is a video that we took, and this is an interview with Annie Shaw, and she's going to be talking about her attitude about family engagement. And what I'd like you to listen for is I went through some of the wins that are a result of engagement. I want to hear you, want to see what you pick up from her about what those wins are for her. Okay? So hopefully you'll be able to hear. Everything's turned up. Annie, as a teacher, I certainly want to give you an opportunity to talk about, and you know, we usually have a lot of teachers on the call to talk about, you know, why are you so committed to engaging with families, and what do you get out of it? You know, sometimes we hear teachers say, you know, oh, this is one more thing to put on my plate. Oh, you know, this is going to be too much, and I'm already doing all these things already. We get a lot of that sometimes as pushback, and I totally get it because teachers are doing a lot. But why is this important to you? What does it offer you as a teacher?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many reasons that family engagement is important to me. And the first one is that families are the experts on their child. And I'm committed to knowing my students deeply. I'm committed to sparking their curiosity and having them be intellectually engaged. And partnerships with families, I believe, really make that possible. Um, Families are what give us insight into a child's passions, into their strengths, into their areas of growth, and into like the social and emotional health of that child. So to me, that's baseline. Another reason family engagement is so important to me is because there's so much expertise among the families. So in a normal school year, I try to get as many experts into the classroom as possible. And as a teacher of Black and Brown students, I think it's really like vital for us to widen this idea of who the teacher is and who the experts are. And we need more people of color in front of our students. We need more men in front of our students. I teach at the elementary level. And so at the beginning of every year, I take an inventory and I ask families, like, what can you come in and teach us this year? What can you share with us? And, you know, with the assumption that we're going to go partially remote or fully remote this year, I actually think that there are more opportunities than ever to bring those experts and all the families into our classroom space, because it's kind of easier in some ways right now. And then Karen, you asked like, what does it do for me? And there certainly is a personal component to it. One of the things that I love about working with young people is it is authentic. Kids are real. So they don't hide their joys, they don't hide their frustrations, they don't hide their anger. And I like that. I like being in a real kind of raw space every day. And it feeds me to have those kind of intense relationships with kids. And I like having those relationships with families too. It honestly, it feeds me as a human to be able to interact with adults that way. And I think that when students and teachers and parents are in partnership and interacting authentically, students feel that viscerally. And it provides emotional support for them, and it provides like spiritual support as well. And I think that when we do that and when our students witness that, we're saying to our students, we've got you, we love you, and we're all on your team.
Annie, could you just say just a little bit, just one more thing I want to add in to follow up. So what would you say to teachers who are reticent about engaging with families? I mean, you said a lot about how it fills you up, right? You said it feeds me as a human. I love that. But are there a couple of other tidbits for those people who might still be a little hesitant about this that you can share?
Yeah, I think that in the long run, deep family relationships make the job easier and make the job more joyful. Teaching is so hard, it is so exhausting. And there is going to be a point in every school year where we're going to have some kind of difficult conversation with a parent. And when we have done the foundational work of building that relationship, those conversations are not difficult. They're saying, hey, I'm concerned about this. Are you noticing this? Rather than making a phone call that I feel nervous about, that the parent doesn't want to receive. It's to me that work of building that relationship, that's like the first 2 months of school. And that first 2 months of school helps you for the rest of the school year. So to me, I just think it pays off so much to have those relationships from the beginning.
Okay, so in the chat, I would love for you guys to put, what are some of the wins that you heard from Annie? What were some of the things that she said are the outcomes from this kind of partnership? So if you could just maybe quickly think, if you're with a team, maybe you could talk to each other just for a minute, maybe put in a collective response. But what are some of the wins that you heard from Annie? So Christine says broadening the idea of who are the educators, right? So she's pulling in families into her classroom. Makes her job easier. Yep, that's what I hear all the time. Because again, it goes from, oh my goodness, you're asking me to do more, to, oh my goodness, now that I'm doing this, I see that it's actually made my job easier. Whether I'm a teacher, school leader, district leader, community leader, bringing in the families. Yeah, it's tough when we have to talk about the processes, but boy, once we get rolling, it makes our jobs a lot easier. Uplifting the voices and experiences of marginalized students and families. Yep. Children are real. Okay. So thank you. So you can see that, it's pretty, Annie is one of those educators who will never go back to not engaging families, because she really feels that if she heard her
Annie,
say it fills her up as a human, right? It fills her up. So now let's talk about, we've sort of gone through the why family engagement is important, the where's the beef, the ROI answer. But you're probably all thinking about, okay, so what does the practice actually have to look like in order for it to be effective? So what does high impact family engagement practice actually look like? And I'd written this piece for the Carnegie Corporation after the pandemic, and they said, we would like you to write a call to action, something that would sort of get everybody charged up and ready to do this work. What have we learned during the pandemic, actually? And how should we be describing family engagement practice? And so the words that I used in this piece is that the new normal, and we were hearing this from educators about family engagement practice, like when we close our eyes and we sort of embrace the energy of what it should feel like. Family engagement now should be liberatory, solidarity driven, and equity focused. So I do want you to also, again, I try to keep this a little bit interactive, even though we're on Zoom. Just quickly, when you see these terms, liberated, liberatory, solidarity driven, equity focused, what do they mean to you? So let's start with the word liberatory. So in the chat, when you hear the word liberatory, what does that word mean to you? Agency. What else? What does liberatory mean? How does it feel? Freeing, yes, absolutely. Empowering, lifting of a burden. These are great. Transformation, freedom from colonized mindset. Yep, I often say to people, I say to my students, is that, wherever you go to work, wherever you decide that you're going to do your best work, it should be liberatory. You shouldn't feel like you have to keep a part of yourself away from or out or at the back door. That shouldn't be the case. Okay. Freedom from oppression. Absolutely. Demasking. Wonderful. These are wonderful. Anti-racist. Absolutely. So we want our practice to be liberatory. How about solidarity driven? What comes to mind? Yep. Community. Authentic. Together. Building. Collaboration. These are all wonderful. Same team. Yes. So this is what makes this kind of family engagement different from some of the stuff we've been seeing in the news. That's not solidarity driven family engagement. That's engagement that is designed to be divisive, to be, us, them. So this is different. And this means we actually have to build those partnerships before we actually sit down and do the work. Okay. What about equity focus? I think we all know what that means, right? Okay. Yep. We do what's needed. Fair. When I go to around the country and I go to places where everybody's all of a sudden freaked out by the word equity, I say to them, equity means fairness. So what is so scary about being fair? I don't quite understand. Somebody needs to explain to me why fairness all of a sudden is something that's so scary. And a lot of times there's silence in the room, or people say, well, it's been weaponized. I say, yeah, but we got to get back to the basics, and it means fairness. So, if your child has a disability, we want to be fair. If families live in a rural community and we've got to find a way to get them information, we want to be fair. That's what we're talking about. Okay? All right. I am going to stop sharing right now. Please. And I said to them, well, actually, no, because what we're going to do is we're going to actually start to live up to what's in the framework. So instead of me having to change the framework for the moment I finally met the framework. And so what I'd like to do is to have us go through the dual capacity building framework. We're going to do it quickly because I know that we have maybe about another half hour. And what I'd like to do is to talk to you about what your practice now needs to look like. We talked about it being liberatory, solidarity driven, and equity focused. Well, the framework is actually the blueprint for how you can do that. It gives you the information about what effective practice has to look like in your own practice, but also the supports that you need to put together in order for the framework to thrive. Next slide, please. And so here's the framework, the full framework. It's set up sort of like a logic model. Next slide, please. And so you can press it once more, actually twice more. And you'll see that we have actually, just like a logic model, what we've done is we have identified what are the challenges to effective partnership. And you'll see two sets of challenges here. Both the educators, in terms of the things that keep them from having effective engagement practices, but then also for families. And so take a look. So first of all, I know that if I could see all of you, I would ask you this question and ask you to respond. So I'm sure many of you have been classroom teachers, and maybe you can put this in the chat. How many of you, when you were first in the teaching profession, in particular your pre-service work, how many of you had a full course on family and community engagement? Could you put yes in the chat if you had a full course on family and community engagement? So you have okay, most people, Chastity said yes, but most people are saying no. Okay. And this is the problem because, family and community engagement is actually a skill. And when we haven't been trained, these are the things that actually happen. Because of minimal training, we may see partnership is not essential. We may develop deficit mindsets about our families. And then also what we see in terms of the family side is that they have not been exposed to good family engagement practice. Many of them have had negative past experiences, so they don't engage. They might not feel invited, another reason they don't engage. And they might actually feel disrespected, unheard, and unvalued. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, one more press. So in the purple section of the framework, we identify what we call the essential conditions to effective engagement. And so we have two sets of conditions: the process conditions, one more please, and the organizational conditions. The process conditions are what you yourselves, everybody on this call, can start to embed into your own practice. And the organizational conditions are what our systems and structures have to do to support effective family engagement. So, for example, the infrastructure that is required to support effective engagement. Next slide, please. So the process conditions, again, are what you can do to incorporate and to improve your own practice. And I'm going to emphasize this first one because this is the one that gets skipped over. Even though people talk about it, they say that they understand it. A lot of times when I go in and I'm helping a district or schools or organizations to diagnose what's not working with their family engagement practice, it's this first bullet. They have not spent the time developing what we call relational trust, mutual trust between themselves and their families. Now, I want you to think about when you are trying to get someone to trust you. Say it's a new friendship, a new relationship. Put in the chat, what are the things that you do to try to build trust with another human being? What are the things that you do? You listen. Listen is really important. You spend time together. You show interest. You ask questions. You're curious. Yes. You're consistent. Yes. All right. You follow through. You're open-minded. You're vulnerable. Yes. You do what you say you're going to do. These are all excellent. Could we press again, please? because these things that you identified are all the elements of what you do when you're trying to create relational trust. You show respect for the other person, competence. You know, we talked about you talked about do what you say you're going to do. That's the integrity piece. Personal regard, you see the person as another human being. Next slide, please. These are all things that one of my co-collaborators, Ayal Bergman, some of you may know Ayal, he actually co-authored the second framework with me. He has a little checklist for himself where he says, okay, if I'm really trying to build trust with my families, am I doing the following things? You can press 4 times, please. So these are all the questions he asks himself. And these are the things that you all beautifully identified. Am I listening carefully to the other person, no matter who they are? So the purpose of that exercise is to challenge you to make sure that the activities that you're doing for your families are actually linked to learning and development. A lot of times we do what we sometimes call random acts of family engagement, where we're just putting together programming that's based on things that we did 50 years ago. One of the things that I love, but also drives me crazy about our sector is a lot of times we do things that don't work over and over again. It's like what Einstein talks about, you know, the definition of insanity is when you keep doing things over and over again that don't work. And we have a tendency to do that in family engagement, where we do open houses and parent teacher nights that are problematic and we don't fix them. We don't make sure that our families leave those events knowing more how to help their children learn. We don't give families a chance to practice any of the new tools and tips we give them. We just sort of hand them pieces of paper or booklets. And then we don't give them a chance to share with us. We don't create that listening opportunity when we can really hear from them about, you know, the things that they know about their children, about how their children learn. And for a lot of our families, they really learned that and saw that during the pandemic when their children were at home, and have lots of great information that they can share with us as educators. So this is what I want you to do is hopefully you'll be able to go back to that slide, Tawhida. You can share the slide deck with them to say, you know, what are we doing? Are we actually doing this with our families? Are we actually linking them to what their children should know and be able to do? The other parts of the framework, the process conditions are, again, that we see our families through an asset-based lens, that we actually are trying to actively collaborate with our families, and that we're doing culturally responsive and respectful practice, and that there's always an interactive element to whatever it is that we do. Because again, if we aren't working together, aren't planning together, aren't learning together, it just doesn't work. If it's all that we're talking at our families and not doing things with them, this is what happens. And sometimes you're right, we inherit these situations, we inherit these cultures, but that doesn't mean that we can't do better and try to attend to these relationships. We also know now that because of what we've learned during the pandemic, that our families don't have to come right to the school. First of all, we can go to them. And this is something that a lot of our places are doing. And I'll explain an example in a minute, how some places have hired community liaisons and community partners that are in the communities. I was in Albuquerque last fall, and there are community liaisons actually at the reservations and at the pueblos who work with the schools to bring in the elders to talk with the school staff, mostly not at the school, but um, in other places and spaces that feel safe to families and community members. We've got to remember that in many cases, we are trying to dismantle generations of disrespect between home and these institutions. So we have to be nimble, we have to be flexible, we have to understand that some of our families are indeed working 2 or 3 jobs, or they live in rural communities. How can we better use Zoom in a way that's uh, builds the practices that are in the framework where it's relational, right? We're here doing a pretty good job, I think, of building a relationship to overcome the technology today. And so this is the kinds of things that we really want to do, to think about how can we do a practice that meets the conditions that I just laid out here for the process conditions. Next slide, please. Can hit it one more time. So the organizational conditions are what we actually ask a lot of our leaders to do. So we have to see family engagement as a systemic strategy to improvement. And so our leaders have to be talking about family engagement as such. We have to be talking about integrating engagement into everything that we do. So into our human resources, into our finances. Again, what's on the budget gets paid attention to. So we have to sustain engagement through resources, and resources could even be time. Are we giving our people time to build these relationships with families? Next slide, please. So when we start doing these things, when we start putting these essential conditions into place, what we do, and this is, of course, it's called the dual capacity building framework, because we're trying to build the capacity of both our educators and our families to work together in partnership. We start to see that the adults start to shift. So not only are they learning more about how to build partnerships, so their capabilities and skills to do this work increase, their social connections increase, their beliefs about one another increase and get better, and their confidence to do this work increases. You know, a lot of times when we say capacity building, we don't ever define what that really means. And so my colleague Monica Higgins says, well, capacity is really more than just the capabilities. It's our connections, our cognitions, and our confidence. Next slide, please. So once we start doing this, the way that this was graphically represented is like two puzzle pieces coming together. Now our educators are more able to build partnerships with families. They understand the concept of seeing families as co-creators. Our families now, we've opened up the doors. Remember I said full partnership. We've opened up the doors for them to be engaged in different ways. We provide them with the support. You know, one of the things I don't want anybody in this call to think that I'm saying is like just to say, go off and just do family engagement without support. We need the support to do this. We need the resources to do this. We need the infrastructure to do this. But more than anything else, we need the mindset to do this. That is the most important shift in order to go from involvement to engagement, is a mindset shift. Sometimes the changes we make are very small, but they can be very significant. Last slide, please. Next piece. And so this is the outcome. Again, all the research that I shared with you at the beginning and everyone wins, that represents this outcome, that we're seeing improvements in schools and improvements for our students. Next slide, please. So this is actually a quick, I just want to go through this quickly because I want to be able to have some time to answer some questions. This is a district, Richmond Public Schools, that's headed the engagement. The chief engagement officer is Dr. Sade Harris. And what she did was she developed an engagement strategy for chronic absenteeism. So remember I talked about linked to learning and development. You want your family engagement to be linked to a goal. And so their goal in Richmond was to reduce chronic absenteeism, but by using a family and community engagement strategy. Next slide, please. So in terms of the process conditions, one of the ways that we see the dual capacity framework showing up in their work is because they said, okay, we're going to put the assets to do this work into the community. So they hired community liaisons, people who knew the community, to build bridges between home and school. So they really saw the assets were in the community itself to solve this problem of chronic absenteeism. Next slide, please. So they use a community hub strategy. And again, this is seeing sort of this asset-based work, this relational work. They hired these community liaisons. And what they did was they hired people who did not necessarily have, college degrees, things like that, but they had degrees in their communities. Okay. So that was one thing that they did. Next slide, please. And these are the results. I'll say, so you can see that because of this engagement strategy, where they were really using family engagement as their strategy to reduce chronic absenteeism. And I can get you more information about this, or you can get in contact with Sade. It would be great to have her present to this group. You see some double-digit decreases in chronic absenteeism. So again, they saw this, they used an engagement strategy, they engaged community. Their question was, why is it that our children are not able to come to school? Maybe it's something happening in the home. Maybe, so they found out there was a big homelessness problem, and that was contributing to chronic absenteeism. So what they did was they built a partnership with the housing authority. They actually have a housing specialist on their family engagement staff, and that person has been able to place over 200 families in permanent homes. Next slide, please. So what I want you to think about is I want you to shift from seeing family engagement as a goal to family engagement as a strategy. What do I mean by that? A lot of times when I look at district plans or community plans, they'll say things like, reduce chronic absenteeism, increase the number of children reading at grade level, increase the number of students who have post-secondary opportunities, increase family engagement. They have it on the goal side. I want you to take the family engagement out from the goal side and put it on the strategy side, because it's a strategy to get you to your goals. When it's on the goal side, it falls off. It says, well, we'll get to that later. We need to concentrate on these other four, not realizing that actually the way to hit your numbers on the other four is through an engagement strategy. So I want you to shift how you see engagement. It's an actual strategy to get you to where you want to be. Next slide, please. I encourage you to start this work from your own sphere of influence. A lot of times I have people say, well, I'm only a teacher, I'm only a family liaison. But you have power to shift beliefs and mindsets within your own sphere of influence. And that's where I suggest you start. Don't try to build Rome in a day. This work takes time, but start from your own sphere of influence where you can have impact. Next slide, please. These are some of the upcoming conferences and opportunities for professional development that are going to be happening in 2024. And I think Tawhida and I strategized to make it so that my institute at Harvard doesn't conflict with some of the work that that the Ed Design is doing this summer. Is that correct, Tawhida?
We tried, but because of the room and the capacity, it ends up falling in
Oh, no.
the same week. So we tried to work it out, but it did not. But we will figure it out of how we can figure out
Right, because we
the
moved it.
overlap.
We moved ours.
And then ours ended up getting moved because of
Ah,
the PELP calendar and everything
right.
else.
So we can stop sharing screen.
And I also dropped the link to that opportunity in the chat box.
Okay. And we have a few minutes for questions. Come off mute to ask your question, because now that I'm operating on my phone, it's hard for me to see the chat. Or Tawhida, if you want to curate the Q&A, that's fine.
I can curate it if you can put it in the chat box. We had one question already around the fact that some parents will never be able to come in person to family engagement activities or to be able to come to school events, and how are we meaningfully sharing information or engaging them. And I think this goes back to that previous conversation around the virtual space and the use of that. So if you want to answer that.
Well, the other thing is that, you know, sometimes I have found that building the relationship of trust, and that when families know that they're going to be welcomed at the school, honored at the school, respected at the school. Some of our families who we thought could never come decide that they want to, because it feels like more of a warm and welcoming space. So that's one thing. The other thing is that if it's truly logistically impossible, we now have so many other tools. We have texting. We have a number of different companies now have all sorts of tools to connect with families, but we can also go to them. So, you know, I'm hoping that we can think of ways, like if there's a community center, if there's something, you know, I've even seen, I was in a rural Appalachian community in Kentucky years ago, And they made an arrangement. The Walmart there was the place that everybody met. And so they made arrangements to have family meetings there. They did parent teacher conferences there. But again, with Zoom now and other, apps, there are ways that we can communicate with families. I know schools that are still doing Zoom meeting with families, on Monday evenings for 30 minutes to catch them up with the goals of that week. Teachers are still using Zoom. So I think that with the technology now, there are various ways for us to connect with our families. And then, I do know that there are some communities that, even Wi-Fi and hotspots is difficult to connect to. So in some cases, this is one of the goals of the district, and working with the policymakers in their areas to try to get some Wi-Fi hotspots to families. And I know that was done a lot during the pandemic.
Thank you for that. As a parent myself of 3 sons that were going to school in COVID, there are things that I, for lack of a better reference, call COVID keepers. And I feel like the virtual engagement for parents, it was good for me as a parent because I didn't have to leave my house. I could maybe had the food on while you were. So think about like, what are those things that we were forced to do during COVID that we can now keep as best practice moving forward. So thank you, Dr. Mapp, for that. Larry, you can feel free to unmute, and then we have another question in the chat box.
Great, thanks. So, it's a very familiar approach, and, it all makes so much sense, and it's good that the research is bearing it all out. If I may, I want to ask you about the student-centered approach versus family-centered approach. And this comes from my learning in the community of practice of student success planning, and something I was really struck with. I think it was a school in, it was a city in Illinois, where the student was defining their goals from like pre-K, I think, all the way through. And that's a very powerful and different, innovative approach. And so for me, it's really important to be clear about, who's defining the goals, right? And I know the easy answer is, well, everyone is, and it's a partnership. But, it comes down, I think, to questions of power too, and how those problems get defined. And then this also comes from my own experience of as a parent of kids with learning disabilities, and how their voice, even though there was every good intention to have it be a part of it, it was sidelined, and it's had real, consequences because the system isn't designed that way. So I'm wondering if there's an opportunity maybe for the Student Success Planning Institute and your institute to collaborate to maybe look at the framework or maybe integrate it in some way. Just the thought. What are your thoughts?
Well, Larry, thank you. A lot of this is about power and about our willingness to share power. And, I think that the overall mindset here is about co-creation. So whether it's families or students, because I have been in those meetings where students as early as first or second grade are part of the conversation. This whole move towards, student conferences where the student is a part of the conference. A lot of our schools around the country no longer do traditional parent-teacher conferences. They do student-led conferences. Now that does take training. It's not like you can just switch to that overnight. All of this requires training and skill building. But it really is a family meeting. It's a family conference. Everybody's sitting around the table, the teacher, the student, the family members, talking about the student's goals. The student talks about their goals, and everybody agrees on how they can all support this work. And it changes in the way it's done as the kids get older. It changes so that it's developmentally appropriate. But it's all about a different mindset when it comes to who has power. That's the bottom line. But I find in most cases that when we use the right protocols, we train each other on how to do this. Once people start, they don't want to go back. And you're getting comments from your colleagues, from people who use these practices, and I'm sure there will be opportunities for you to share these practices with each other.
The
Yeah.
Unity
No, thanks,
Point is
Tahita.
doing
Yes.
that,
Yep.
that well. Thank you.
You know,
we're
and
at-
let me just talk about home visits. I think people have the home in the home visit is a placeholder. Most of the successful home visit programs I've seen, again, home is a placeholder for what feels comfortable for everybody involved. So in the home visit, especially particularly the protocol that's used by the parent teacher home visit program in California, the family member gets to define where that visit is going to happen. And it does not have to be, or should it never be forced to be in the home. So the family member would say, I feel more comfortable having it at a community center. I feel more comfortable having it at the library. I feel more comfortable having it at the Walmart. I feel more comfortable having it, you know, in my car, or someplace else. That's the thing that gets negotiated. The parent has the power to determine where that is. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, again, the work that I've done there with some of the tribal communities, home visits are never done in the home. They're always done in the community. And they've actually, for them, they've changed the name of them to collaborative visits. So it's supposed to be, again, it makes your context makes a difference. We have to be flexible and nimble in all cases. But yes, I mean, I think that sometimes people hear home visit and they think that it's something that is put on families, and that should never, ever, ever be the case, ever.
Thank you for that, because those are home visits have, when they're done well and effectively, like they can have such a good return on investment, but it also can be harmful or extractive if not done well. So thank you for making that
Absolutely.
distinction and for offering an alternative. We are at 1:32 and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Dr. Mapp, I don't know if you want to have some closing words. And then we can also look in the chat and can get back to you if some of your questions did not get answered, to get back to you.
The one thing that I will say to all of you today is thank you so much for giving me grace with the technology. I've got to find all of my little adapters. These adapters drive us crazy, don't they? Especially with Apple, because I'm finding that, you know, this end doesn't fit into that end. You've got to have a special one for this part or that part. It's a pain. But anyway, I just want to thank you so much for the grace that you've given me today. I hope this was still very helpful to you. We got through it. And it's lucky that we have multiple devices around us. But thank you so much for that, because I really, really appreciate it.
And we want to say thank you, Dr. Mapp, for spending the time with us and sharing your wisdom and expertise. It's been truly a gift. We are in community and in family with each other. So I always feel like this community is a very gracious and loving and giving community. So people will surround you with all of that. So thank you for that. Just want to remind you in the chat. So if you are interested in that summer workshop and are not in a success planning community of practice, that's in the chat for you to be able to attend that. I attended it as a practitioner in the field and learned so much when I did. The other thing too is this is a 3-part series, so we will have 2 other sessions coming up, one at the last week of March and then the last week of May. And those 2 sessions will be looking at how success planning can help with the reduction of chronic absenteeism. And then the other one is around really looking at all means all, and how are we making sure we're serving all populations well, with a specific focus on young people with learning differences. So join us for those. Thank you for hanging in there and sticking in and being a part of this, and for all of your contributions in the chat. With that, we are at the end of our session. And Dr. Mapp, thank you again. And thank you to our Ed Redesign team, because none of this is possible without our full team. We will see you at our